Hi guys, just a quick one. Throughout this video, for some reason, I kept saying 13th century when I actually meant to say 1300s. Sorry guys. Hi guys, welcome back to Social History Sunday. Right, so what are we talking about this week? We're going to have a brief, and I mean a brief, look at law and order, crime and punishment, outlaws. Now, everybody knows the archetypal English outlaw Robin Hood. Now we're going to look at the period in which Robin Hood supposedly carried out his nefarious deeds, if you'd like to call them that. The time when he was out and about, 13th century, late 12th, early 13th century. But the first thing we have to look at is we'll have to have a little look at the legal systems which led up to the situation which allowed for the outlaws of the 13th century to be a thing. Right, so what was an outlaw? An outlaw, well, the term actually means outside the law. If you are declared outlaw, it means you have put yourself in a situation whereby you are outside the protection of the legal system, outside the protections of law. Now this first comes into being as part of the Anglo-Saxon period. And it was specifically the first mentions in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles are the 6th, 7th century. But it continues all the way through to the Norman conquest as part of the Anglo-Saxon legal system. Now, the Anglo-Saxons had what was basically a compensatory legal system. Now all the laws and what have you was set on a local level. So each community would have its own laws and its own regulations. And they would vary from community to community, but not by much. I kept saying 13th So what tended to century happen, when I actually if, for instance, if you got into a fight with somebody and you punched their two front teeth out, you would have to pay compensation, which would, if I remember rightly, two front teeth would be 10 shillings. If you blinded somebody, that would be 20 shillings. If you got into a sword fight and chopped off somebody's foot, that would be 10 shillings. A shilling for a toe. You get the idea. However, for more serious crimes such as rape, murder, that sort of thing, you could well end up being sentenced to death, at which point all your property would be given in compensation to the family of your victim or your victim. So what tended to happen is people in this situation, instead of standing trial, would run away. So there's the beginning of the common thread that's going to run through the three legal systems we're going to look at. They were charged with a crime and then they ran away, at which point they would be declared an outlaw. You would be outside the protections of the law. And just like a wolf, everybody would be expected to kill an outlaw summarily on the spot, if they were capable. But that was the position you were in. And the only way to exist as an outlaw would be to rob other people, to continue robbing. So that's how you came about under the Anglo-Saxon. It was because of the compensatory scheme. Now this all changed during the Norman conquest, when William the Bastard, William I, invaded and conquered England. He changed the legal system from a compensatory system to a punitive system. Now fines still existed, but they were for really, really minor stuff. It's so minor that it's hard to actually find an example. But people were beaten up for selling underweight loaves, that sort of thing. If you were convicted of a petty theft, like an apple, you might have your hand chopped off. If you were convicted of being a scold or something like that, you might have your tongue cut out. And this is where we see the first examples of the connection with the two fingers and archery. If you were found in one of the newly created king's forests, which weren't necessarily a forest, by the way, didn't necessarily have trees in them, they were a hunting park, if you were found in one of these king's forests, a hunting park, just being in possession of a bow and an arrow could result in you losing your fingers. When later on, when it came to the reign of Richard, if you were caught in a king's forest with a bow, you could end up losing your testicles, or your eyes, or both. Now this gave rise to a situation where the Anglo-Saxon population decided that, right, okay, basically if this is Norman justice, we want nothing to do with it. So lots of Anglo-Saxon peasantry decided that they were going to go and live off-grid, and they were going to exist by robbing people. Now generally speaking, the only people that were worth robbing were the Normans. So people would quickly get a reputation, and they would quickly be declared outlaw. Now at this point, under the Normans, once you were known as an outlaw, you'd been charged and you hadn't turned up, you were then open to summary execution on the spot if somebody caught you. Again, part of the barbaric Norman system. They didn't think much of the Anglo-Saxons. Anyway, that legal system started to collapse. So we see a drastic change from the punitive Norman system to a Plantagenet common law system. And by the time it was instigated by Edward II, and by the time we get to Edward I, we have a full-blown common law system in place, which even today is the basis of the English legal system, common law. And basically that said that any person had the right to take any other person, no matter rank, to court for redress in a legal situation. So a commoner could take a nobleman to court. And the way it worked then was you would make an appeal to your local justice, and a charge would be issued, and then the person against whom the charge was issued would be given a trial date. Now if they failed to turn up for 3 trial dates in a row, they would be declared outlaw. But it was a bit different under the Plantagenets, under common law. You weren't automatically summarily sentenced to death. But this saw the rise of the bounty hunter in terms of bring them back alive, sort of thing. They would be paid a bounty to bring people to justice, to bring them to court, so they could stand trial. So those are the differences. That's how you became an outlaw. And it's actually quite funny. The legal system under common law from the 13th century onwards provided for not only that anybody could bring charges against anybody else, just had to apply for them. There was a rudimentary legal aid system where if you couldn't afford a lawyer, one would be appointed and paid for by the crown. And it became so commonplace, became so litigious to society, that they reckoned in the 1400s that at any given time, almost everybody had become an adult at some point in their life. But the good thing was that the easiest way to clear your name and be no longer considered an outlaw, sorry, not an adult, an outlaw, was to basically go and stand trial. And then your name would be cleared, you'd no longer be an outlaw, and you could return to society. Now the main reason most people in the Plantagenet era, the common law era, went on the run and became outlaws wasn't because they were afraid of some kind of punitive punishment, although they did still exist for certain crimes. It was actually to try and save up for the fine that they were probably going to get if found guilty. So there we go. So now you know what the outlaws were and how you became one. Now we're going to talk about who were the outlaws. Now as far as Robin Hood's concerned, the first time he ever appears anywhere in any written form is in 1521 in the writings of John Mayer, who was a Scottish historian and cleric. And I think personally, can't prove it, I think personally he was the author of the original story. However, in the 13th century there were real outlaws in and around Sherwood Forest doing the sort of things that Robin Hood was supposed to do. My own personal favourite is Adam the Leper. Now he started his criminal career. Now nobody knows whether he truly was a leper or not, but he started his career disguised or dressed as a leper. Now a leper in the 13th century had the right to wander the countryside unopposed, unmolested by anybody. They also had the right to beg from the town limits. They could stand at the town limits and beg anybody in the town or going into or leaving the town for alms and for food, and without molestation. So that's what Adam did, but he was also he was also predisposed to, if he came across lone travellers on the road, he would attack, kill and rob them. Now that was in the beginning of his career in the 1310s, 1320s. He died apparently in 1360. But anyway, later on in his career, he actually built a gang in southwest England, in Essex and Wessex, places like that, Anglia, Lincoln. And he specialised in robbing town treasuries. And he's credited with the biggest ever robbery of a crown treasury in about 1325, I think. And it'd be the equivalent of robbing the Tower of London today. He got away with a massive amount of money, which, as far as I'm aware, was never really recovered. Successful bad guy. But there were others. I mean, for instance, the Folvilles, the Cotterills. Now, the Folvilles and the Cotterills and the Bradburns were basically noble families. They were landed gentry. The Folvilles, for instance, were led by Eustace Folville. Now, the head of the family was Richard. He inherited when their father died. But under the legal system at the time, only the oldest inherited. And all the younger children were expected just to cope for themselves. That's why a lot of the younger sons went into the clergy. The daughters were married off. But the Folvilles decided they were going to stick together, and they were going to subsidise their income by committing crimes. And they did murder for money, for payment. They did highway robbery. They did all sorts. And there's actually a funny story about Alison, one of the sisters. Apparently she robbed somebody in London and was caught and was put on trial. Now, one of the things that Edward did was introduce trial by jury. But the jury wasn't like it is today, the jury of your peers. In the 13th century, a jury was comprised of people you knew, friends and family, because they were judged to be the best able to say whether or not you'd done it or not. Who guessed that she would be found not guilty? Anyway, but there were other families. The Cotterills in Derbyshire, led by James Cotterill, they were notorious for kidnapping. They even kidnapped Montgomery. Wasn't Montgomery, Mortimer. A bishop called Mortimer, I think, if I remember rightly. If I can remember, I'll put it up here somewhere. But they held him, they kidnapped him and held him to ransom, and they were paid, I think it was about 18,000 marks, or 1,800 marks, 1,800 marks, a lot of money back then, the equivalent of £1 million today almost. And the Bradburns in Durham, they were swines. They would just wander around the county, not the city of Durham, the county of Durham, and they would charge people tolls for being on the roads, even if the road wasn't a toll road. And if they didn't pay up, they were quite open to robbing and even killing them. So there was lots and lots of outlaws out there. There was even one in Devon and Cornwall called the Savage Company. Every county seemed to have its own outlaw gang that was generally raised from the nobility. Now, a lot of these noble families cleared their name. I will go back to the Folvilles. The Folvilles actually cleared most of their names by signing up to do military service. And a few of them, Eustace for instance, actually did so well in the Scottish Wars that he was actually landed, he was knighted and given lands in his own right. Now unfortunately, Richard, the head of the family, he was never cleared and he was actually executed for his crimes. Although ironically, his execution was later declared unlawful by the church and he was cleared about 5 years after he was actually killed. Anyway, so there's a brief look at crime and punishment, outlaws in England in the 13th century. Hope you found it interesting. Again, any comments, any questions, please feel free, and we shall talk again soon. Stay safe, keep slinging the sticks. Cheers, guys.